All right, welcome to everyone who's joining us for our webinar, Getting Started with Service Learning and After-School Programs. We're excited to have you here with us. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and the webinar resources and the presentation will be shared with folks who have registered for today's presentation in a follow-up email. It will also be available on our webinar archives page. Before we get started, please feel free to just introduce yourself in the chat box. We also have a question there for you to learn a little bit more about you. Please just answer it as well in the chat box. Thank you. And sorry, one reminder about using the chat box. The default setting in Zoom is set to just all panelists, which means that only we can see your responses. To encourage more dialogue among our participants, please make sure to change the settings in your chat box to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see them.
All right, I have 2 p.m. so Eastern, so we will get started right now. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Getting Started with Service Learning and After-School Programs. My name is Alexis Steines-Rao with the Afterschool Alliance, and I'm very excited to be co-presenting today with our partners from Youth Service America and the National Youth Leadership Council to talk about the topic of service learning and after-school and how we can be able to provide youth and children in our programs with opportunities to participate in these kinds of activities. As my colleague Chandler had mentioned at the very beginning, we do have a question for you. So please introduce yourselves in the chat box where you are from, but also take a moment to consider, what is a strength or characteristic of your after-school program that lends itself to incorporating service learning? Something that we will be thinking about this afternoon during this webinar. So please enter your thoughts in the chat box. So could just go to the next slide, please. I'll go over what we're going to be covering. So we're going to take a look at what service learning is and why it's important to include this in after-school programming. We have a number of resources to share if you're just beginning this journey, or if you're thinking about ways to further incorporate service learning into your programming. And we'll also give you some inspiration through some various examples of programs. And then our colleagues at YSA are going to share about an exciting new grant opportunity for after-school programs that are interested in service learning. Any questions that you might have throughout the course of the webinar, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll be keeping an eye on that. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll set aside some time to be able to answer some of those questions so that you can better understand, have some ideas on how to incorporate service learning in your work. So on the next slide, I would love for my colleagues at Youth Service America to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what their organization is. So Karen?
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be with you today. And thanks to the Afterschool Alliance for having us on this webinar. I'm Karen Daniel. I'm the Vice President of Programs at YSA. And I will let my teammates introduce themselves, Mike and Scott.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Gansky, and I'm the Vice President of Partnerships at YSA.
And I'm Mike Minks, our Vice President of Operations.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Mike. YSA is a 35-year-old nonprofit organization that really has been working since the time we started to engage youth in solving important community problems through service. And we've always believed that service and service learning have a triple benefit. They benefit the youth volunteers that engage in them. They benefit the community and the people that benefit from those projects. And it benefits our democracy as we have youth engaged as active citizens by taking a stance on important issues. We work across the United States and around the world to engage youth ages 5 to 25 to really find their voice and take action and make impact through their projects. We really emphasize the 21st century skills to help youth really gain important skills that they will need throughout their lives in school and work and in the community to solve problems, not just now, but really making it a lifelong commitment. We're working on something kind of exciting that we'll tell you more about in this webinar that we call our America 250 campaign, to really engage communities to strengthen the number of youth that do participate in service and service learning and larger community leadership to 50% of all youth by America's 250th birthday on July 24th, 2026, on the way to 100% of participation 10 years later. And then YSA also is involved in programs around engaging youth in days of service. You see the three big ones that we promote here: the 9/11 Day of Service in September, MLK Day of Service in January, and Global Youth Service Day in April. So you'll be hearing more about those. We also do a lot around our Service Vote campaign of linking youth volunteering to civic engagement and voting. And finally, we look to help youth add service to whatever it is that they love to do in their work. And last but not least, we support all of those efforts through grants, resources, and training and recognition, of which you'll hear more about as well. So with that, I will stop there and turn it over to my colleague at NYLC, Julie.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Julie Rogers Bascom. I am the Director of Learning and Leadership at the National Youth Leadership Council, NYLC. Well, our mission is to create a more just and sustainable and peaceful world and with young people. And I'm honored to be on this panel with my friends at Afterschool Alliance and Youth Service America. We do this work in three different buckets. Our first bucket is to support educators. So the teachers in our K-12 and higher ed and preschool, we are supporting them with resources, training, coaching. We support people to actually take the binder that they got at the training and actually put it into practice. We also inspire youth leaders. We are working with young people to use service learning as that strategy to get to develop leadership skills. And I'm here to tell you, leaders, there are lots of different kinds of leaders. It's not just that, hey, get her done, it's my way or the highway. There are lots of different kinds of leaders. And I'm here to say that if you would have told me 20 years ago, I'd be talking about leadership, I would have thought that's an overused word. Well, I'm here to say that I think service learning is one of those ways that young people can grab onto actual skill building through service learning to build their leadership skills. And then the last bucket is really about advancing the field of service learning. Certainly there have been peaks and valleys of funding stream, and we're working together, Afterschool Alliance, Youth Service America, and all of you people out in Zoom land, we're working together to make sure that service learning is one of those strategies that young people get to experience before, during, and after school.
Thank you, Julie. So we're really excited to have this conversation with all of you today to talk about service learning and its importance. Service learning is a great fit for after-school programs. After school is often about student voice and student choice, making sure that youth and students can stay engaged in their communities. And service learning in many ways brings that to youth in their communities by allowing them to identify problems, try and find ways to solve them, and work within their communities to really find ways to contribute back to their community. So I'm going to turn it right over now to Scott with YSA to talk a little bit more in detail about what service learning is and the differences between community service, and kick us off. So Scott.
Great, thanks so much. And everyone, welcome. We're excited to have you here. So yeah, just want to take a nice little deep dive into service learning to let you learn a little bit more about it. There's a lot of different definitions, but the one we're looking at today is really, it really is an approach to teaching and learning in which students build and use academic knowledge and 21st century skills to address meaningful community needs. And with service learning, it really is kind of that 2.0 of service. It's taking it to the next level, and it's really linking it to academics. We know a lot of people use community service. We love community service, and it really is a great way for students to get involved. But there are definitely some differences between community service and service learning. One is that, community service is a little, more of a single day event. And typically youth aren't as involved in the planning process as much. A lot of times with community service, there isn't as much of a reflective component that's built in. And we also know that it's a great on-ramp. It's a great gateway. We have a lot of different days of service. We have, 9/11 Day, and obviously MLK Day and Global Youth Service Day, where people will, youth will get involved for the first time, and it's really a great experience. But when you start to shift into service learning, that's when you start adding in all of the elements that make it beautiful, which is the investigation process, which we'll talk about in a minute, of really diving in, adding in that meaningful reflection throughout the process, and really most importantly, making those, intentional connections to what you're learning academically. I was a classroom teacher before I was at YSA, and I used it, and I used service learning and after school, and just the body language on the students changed, their attitude, the academic skills. And it was really just something that was, you could just tell, you could feel the energy in the room when they would start to be involved in a service learning project from beginning to middle to the end. And so on the next slide here, we'll talk a little bit about some of the other, the skills in which students, you can use your spark. So the late Peter Benson talked about, how every youth really has a spark. That's something that they're extremely passionate about. They get up in the morning and they say, this is what fires me up. This is what I care about. I care about music. I care about poetry. I care about animals. So really looking at those areas. And then also what's great about that, you can, put that into making a difference, but you're building those 21st century skills, those 4 C's. So you're taking a look at an issue and you're really taking a deep dive, and you're using critical thinking skills. You're thinking of, solutions. So you're using creativity. You're collaborating. Youth are collaborating with their peers to find creative solutions. And then you're communicating, maybe you're presenting to a public audience or to your peers about really what you learned throughout that process. And you'll see on the next slide here, the way that youth can make a difference. We like to say ASAP, which is usually as soon as possible. There's a great way of looking at the type of action that you take. And so that's through awareness campaigns, so really educating people about certain issues and really how you can have positive change behaviors. Service, maybe that's indirect service or direct service. Advocacy, so maybe there's a law or a policy that youth really care about and they want to make a difference in. And then also philanthropy, which isn't always just about raising money. You could also be raising items or different things like that. And so looking at that, and then you're connecting it with the global goals, which was signed in 2015, 193 countries, really that blueprint, the roadmap of really what are these key issues that are really facing the world, and being able to take a look at those issues and being able to think globally and acting locally. And so that's such a great opportunity for youth to be at that level. So for the next slide here, you'll see the IPARDC process. This is your common service learning process, really easy way to understand how to plan a meaningful service learning project from beginning to the end. And so at the beginning, you have that investigation. This is before your project even kicks off, really. You're really taking a deep dive into an issue. And so what does that look like? That could be pulling up some articles, some videos. Maybe you're bringing in some experts or partners to have a dialogue, looking at what research is out there and really seeing what kind of organizations are already doing this type of work. How can we work with them? How can we use, our investigative skills to maybe do a poll or a research or a study? And so really just taking that deep dive into an issue during investigation. Then as you move on into preparation and planning and action, that's the meat of it. During the project, that's when you as a facilitator are organizing the project, making sure that maybe you have different organizational teams, finding ways for students to gather resources. Maybe they need to recruit volunteers for an event. Finding a way to tell the story of what service learning looks like from the beginning to the end. And then also working on, organizing some of those event logistics. And so you as an adult facilitator during that time are just making sure that the students are really, in the driver's seat and they're really running everything, but you're making sure that they have the tools that you need, that you're asking them the questions to make sure that they're focused and really have what they need to plan a successful project. And then reflection isn't necessarily a step, because reflection is really something that is done throughout, at the beginning, the middle, and the end. The more you can reflect, the better. And then finally, demonstration and celebration. And so maybe that's doing an evaluation and sharing the results. Maybe that's bringing people together virtually or in person to do really a showcase to really talk about the impact that a service learning project made on an individual, as well as the impact that it made in the community. And then finally, one forgotten step that's really important is to celebrate at the end, to really say, look what we did, look what we were able to accomplish. And one of the things we like to say about this is really, it's the process, not the product. It really is about students being involved, making little mistakes along the way. That's all part of it, right? It's just being involved in that process and being able to plan a project from beginning to end. And so this is one of the things that we look at. We've been working with a lot of schools and organizations and everything, and we've been looking at, from a service learning project, what is kind of a checklist? What are some of the areas if you're going to be planning a project from beginning to the end? And these are some of the areas that we look for in a successful service learning project. Really important one here is, does it have student voice? Making sure that students are involved in the project, that it's not just saying, okay, you do this, you do that. No, like they're involved in it. They're lifting up their voice. Meaningful service, so helping students learn about the community needs. So maybe, for example, providing students with articles so that they could read about it and maybe have a better understanding. The next thing is community partnership. So, bringing in, introducing community partners, even letting students reach out to the community partners and bringing them in, not necessarily to lecture students, but to let students actually have conversation and dialogue and to really learn about that issue at a deep level. And then meaningful learning and link to curriculum, super important here. So giving students an opportunity to really practice and demonstrate and really talk about those 21st century skills, those critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication, and talk about what they're learning. And then finally, reflection. So just making sure that we're building in reflection at the beginning, the middle, and the end to make sure that students understand how they've grown as an individual and the impact that they've made in the community. And so one of the things we want to talk about here now are the YSA resources. We have a lot of great resources, and the way that it's set up, and there's some links in the chat right now, is we have a few different kind of on-ramps. So you'll see right here, Youth Changing the World. That's really written in a kind of a youth-friendly way. It's for youth ages 13 to 25. It's written for them to be able to kind of take on that project, maybe individually or as a small group, and you'll see how it breaks down. And then below that on our website, which we put in the chat there, you'll see that there's a short training video that was led by a youth that walks through that process of planning a project. Then we have Kids in Action, which is written for more of the younger age, the 5 to 12. And so that's really written in a nice, simple to understand, easy to understand way of how you plan a meaningful service project. And then we have a webinar there that was actually led by a 3rd grader, which is pretty cool. And then we have Semester of Service, which is really follows that IPARDC process that we just went through, and it shows you all these planning guides and everything else. And we'll walk through that in a minute. But there's also a training there, about 45-minute training that walks through every single step in the process and gives a real big deep dive. And all of these resources are free, by the way. So if you look at semester of service, one of the things I will say about this that's kind of cool, and maybe it's because I was a teacher and we always try to find ways to borrow good resources, is that it's in PDF, but it's also in Microsoft Word. So if you want to go through and make tweaks and changes to it, go for it. That's awesome. That's what we encourage. So as you can see here, it has a breakdown of every single step in the service learning process, and then the page numbers that correspond. And you'll see that there are planning templates, all sorts of activities that you can use with students. There's exemplars and case studies. So it's something that we've just continuously updated over the years. And so this version is something, obviously that you can use when you're planning, your service learning project, from beginning to end. And then a couple of other kind of places to explore on the website here as well. We'll just kind of pull that up for you real quick. There are sections of the website I know that we have, and yeah, we're going to keep kind of scrolling down a little bit here. There's an area where you can kind of create your own Youth Service Institute. We have new resources on anti-racism and youth service resources. We have a ton of resources that link to, obviously, COVID-19, and there's a lot of different projects that link to COVID-19, as well as how that links to the global goals. And then just a whole bunch of great projects for really planning virtual service learning projects. And other resources that you see here are on, various specific types of things. So like specifically around hunger or road safety or financial literacy. So you're seeing a lot of various things. We've got different languages for our youth changing the world. And then we also have some really great Lead ASAP tip sheets that are really great and easy to understand for everyone. As well as we have some various kind of case studies that you'll see too on this page of student leaders who really around the world that have written tip sheets on how you can take their project and maybe replicate it in your own community. So you'll see a lot of different projects from environmental e-waste to creative writing, creating your own creative writing classes. So you're seeing a lot of good stuff here that is really engaging. We also have resources on engaging youth that are traditionally not asked to serve. Such an important part is making sure that everyone in the class is involved and that you're bringing in as many people as possible in the community. We have resources that talk about 21st century skills and those 4 C's. And a lot of that is obviously, in that knowledge center that YSA provides. So hopefully that gave you kind of a better understanding. I know you can take a deep dive after this into YSA's resources, but I'm super excited to be able to turn it over to Julie to talk about some of the great resources that NYLC offers. And Julie?
Scott, you're a hard act to follow. I have used your resources over the 25 or 30 years that I've been engaged in service learning. So thank you to the good and important work you did. And you said a couple of things that really resonated with me. I always laugh and say that on my tombstone, it's going to say service learning is a process, not a project. And so that's one of the things that we start with service learning. It is a process. And so it's a mind shift from that one, the one-off to how do we engage young people with outcome? What are the outcomes that we want for young people? Community service is really good and important work. Service learning is connected to what we want for young people. I want to talk to you about 3 different kinds of resources that we have developed over the last 2 years. The first set of resources is what we call Engage. They are handbooks where they're divided into 3 different age groups. One is elementary, one is middle, and one is high school. Certainly different developmental needs going on there. But this series is more of an introduction to service learning material, and it's an overview for adult facilitators. Each session in these separate handbooks has 3 parts. There's always a warm-up, activity. There is then a main content activity or activities, and there's always a reflection. And we follow the service learning process, that IPARD process that you were talking about. You can also adapt it to your own needs. So oftentimes I think one of the entryways, one of the on-ramps to service learning is to start with a project that you might be already doing, and how do you move that towards service learning, where there are those outcomes and those standards and the things that make service learning such an important strategy for young people. It can also be if you are working with a group of young people and they have a specific issue that they would like to explore. I worked with a group of young people who were talking about the inequities of the dress code in their middle school. So we don't have a specific handbook on it, but you can use these handbooks and craft it to fit what the needs are that your young people are wanting to address. Next slide, please. Scott talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, as they're often referred to. Our next group of resources are handbooks that are created that address this certain SDGs. These goal areas, these 17 goal areas, you saw the image earlier, they fall really into three overarching categories. One is ending extreme poverty, one is fighting inequity and injustice, and the last one is tackling climate change. Well, we have, I think, 6 books, where there are 2 more that are on their way to the press. And these resources are all online and free to you as well. And maybe, Chandler, if you could put the link to the NYLC store. Don't let that fool you. Store doesn't mean you have to pay for them, but you do have to register and to access those. But these 17 or these books will allow you to walk through the process, the service learning process, while you're addressing a specific need. Right now, I'm showing you one on education equity. One is on health and well-being. We actually created, when the pandemic hit, we actually created an online version so young people could do service learning online through this book with youth workers facilitating. And then the other one that we're reflecting right now is peace building. We do have another one online, and that's on climate action. So this actually, if you go to the next page, please, this is just an example of what a page might look like. We list our outcomes, we list some examples, and we give a detailed description of what the activities are. So it's really a plug and play. You can take this handbook and put it into practice. We know of a lot of people or a lot of programs right now that are using this for summer. And wherever you might be, if you're in person or you're doing everything virtually right now, this is a way for you to weave service learning into your program. Our next slide, thank you, Chandler was reading my mind. Our next slide is a new book that we just launched in April. It is called Getting Started in Service Learning. And this book actually takes you through the alignment to particular standards. It helps you if you are a teacher, if you're a K-12 teacher, or if you are a youth worker and you know what your standards are. It's more about the process rather than specific sessions. And again, this can be found on NYLC's website. Our next slide, I'm going to pause for a moment. Our next slide, I'm really curious to know why you want to use service learning. Here is a link to a Padlet. Chandler's going to put it in the chat for us. I'd like you to go to this Padlet and take a moment to answer that question. Why do you want to use service learning? Now, you'll see on the left side, there's a column for those of you who are attending this workshop. The reason I aggregate these is that it might be fun for you to look back and see what other people are saying. Let's see, let me go to that. Goodness. So I am seeing somebody who said we. There we go. We're needing to aggregate that. We're needing to refresh that. Why do you want to use service learning? Community. And if you don't have access to this to the Padlet, please feel free to put your comments and thoughts in the chat. I think this is also really useful to share with other people why you're thinking of using it, because someone might have an idea that you can share and build upon. I want to also mention that NYLC has a membership program. You can subscribe to NYLC to get some of the resources, or to get a monthly newsletter and other resources that we curate for our subscribers and our members. So again, check out nylc.org for some of these resources. I'd like to bounce it over to Karen, and she's going to talk a little bit more about some of the examples of what service learning looks like in after school.
Thanks so much, Julie. So one of the things that we do a lot at YSA is tell stories about the great things that young people are doing, in the hopes that it will inspire others to do similar things in their communities. And I hope that some of these examples will kind of help you think about what this might look like in your community. First of all, I want to share a couple of screenshots from our website at YSA around examples where you'll see a map of the United States and a lot of different projects. We are grateful to the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation for funding our work around incorporating service learning in after-school programs. And we have some grants to give to support programs, which you'll be hearing about next. So that's coming. But what you see here is a map of the 60 grantees that we've funded over the last 2 years. And you can see more about each of these projects and efforts on our website. And you'll see the link that just went into the chat box there. On the next slide, we would love for you to put in the chat box examples of service learning activities that you've done or that you've seen other programs do, so that as I share some stories, we can also hear some stories and great examples from all of you. So as I'm sharing these stories, would love for you to put that in the chat box if you'd like to. On the next slide, this is the first example that I wanted to share with you. This is a Boys and Girls Club of Highlands County in Florida. And they did a lot of work over an extended period of time around community gardening, which is a popular project that we see. What I love about their project is that it really grew over time and expanded to include a lot of different facets of their work. They wanted to grow fresh vegetables to donate to their local food banks. And they made their first donation in April for our Global Youth Service Day, which they were an active part of. A few of the things they did that made their project really successful. They partnered with a master gardener who was also a popular basketball coach that the youth really liked. So that was someone that they could really look to for expertise around creating their gardens. They partnered with Home Depot to get discounts on supplies that they needed. They, as a part of what they learned, they wrote a Kids Garden Club workbook for other students who might want to create gardens in the future. They even got so excited that they planted flowers around the signs for the Boys and Girls Club so that it was more attractive and appealing for people to want to come. And the other thing that they told us is that while this was a project that started with a lot of younger kids, as the teens saw what they were doing, they got really excited too and wanted to get involved. And in the end, Boys and Girls Club ended up incorporating some classes for their teen curriculums around careers in agriculture, which are very common in their area of Florida. So this was a project that really kind of grew and expanded over time to include a lot of different facets. If you go to the next slide. This is the city of Passaic Recreation Department in New Jersey. And they did a great project called Operation Helping Those in Need, which was focused on creating care packages for the homeless. They developed individual and personalized cards and messages that they put with each care package. They worked with their human services department and to really learn about the homeless population in their city. Scott and Julie both talked about the importance of investigation, and I think they did this really well as they planned their project. And they held, among other things, an event for about 50 people where they disseminated their care packages, some of the pictures that you see here. And they really emphasized the importance of youth having direct interaction with the homeless population, where they could sit and talk with them and learn about them and really kind of get to know them as people. And the youth talked about how much they learned about the homeless population in their city, both as part of their investigation and through these personal relationships that they didn't know before. On the next slide, you'll see this is a Campfire Program in Maryland. And they have been doing weekly activities for several months, all around the theme of mental health and community building. They have done different things like writing letters to seniors who are isolated because of COVID. They had a birthday party for a girl whose family was not able to provide her one because of hardships they'd been having. Like I say, their biggest focus has been on children's mental health. And so you see here some of the activities that they've done around encouraging younger kids to develop chalk art around positive messaging in their community. They've engaged older kids around doing youth panels about how COVID has affected them. And they've done a lot of great contests and messaging for what that can look like in their community. On the next page. This is a group out of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia called Youth Action. And they have done a lot of work around creating virtual webinars by youth and for youth around really important community topics. They have partnered with a local university to really bring a lot of kind of data and scholarship to the issue. For Martin Luther King Day in January, they did their first two webinars, one on anti-racism efforts. And they had a professor join the youth to really talk about the history of racism and ways to combat it. They also did a session that week on gun violence, where they showed a film and had a presentation and a discussion after the film where the producer of the film joined them as part of that conversation. They've been working with a group in their community called Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium, where they worked with them to develop PPE in the community, and they really focused on minority communities that were disproportionately affected by COVID. And a few upcoming webinars that they're working on now are one on education equity, one on financial literacy, and one on advocating against anti-Asian hate crimes. So you can see that they really take on some of the most important issues of the day. And I love how they really are tackling those approaches through community dialogue and education. And the next slide is the last example that I wanted to share with you. This is from Irving Independent School District in Texas. And they did a lot over the last few months around COVID safety messaging. They had students design posters and they really emphasized kind of a home focus here because students weren't in school. So they wanted to do something that youth could do either on their own or in small groups with family. Youth worked individually to create posters. And then one of the fun things they did is they partnered with a local ad company And the employees from that ad company served as judges for their contest. You can see some of the judges there in that middle photo on the right side. You can see some of their artwork and their entries hanging here in their library. And then at the bottom of that screen, you see one of the youth winners, a really young one, which was fun, around their contest. And then the ad company helped them to display the winning entries throughout the community. They partnered with their local Chamber of Commerce and their local libraries to display these messages and really promote that important awareness throughout their community. So these are just a few of the amazing stories that we see. And on the next slide here, you'll see a clip from a webinar that we were grateful to our colleagues at NYLC to feature us on around their show on the radio, The Power of Young People to Change the World, where we had another one of our grantees, Kid Power, talking about the work that they've done. And you can see that here. And on the next slide, we wanted to make sure you saw what we call our Lead ASAP Idea Center. And this is a searchable database of projects that youth can lead and after-school programs can do. It can be searched by that Spark area that Scott talked about in terms of the things that young people love to do. It can also be searched by issue area when youth decide on what issue they would like to address. And it includes dozens and dozens of real projects that youth have done that you might be able to take inspiration from and think about with your youth how you might adapt those projects. On the next slide, I will turn it over to my colleague, Mike, to tell you about these grants that we've been alluding to. So Mike, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Karen. So this is to the exciting part. We get to talk about some available funding and to support you if you are interested in adding these types of service learning opportunities to your program. And the application for this, for next school year, for the 2021-2022 year is open right now for the next couple of months through the end of July. And I will bring up the program landing page, which you can get to at ysa.org/afterschool. And the link is in the chat as well. And so this, you'll see more information about the program. We're looking for up to 60 grantees. So again, as Karen mentioned earlier, we funded 60 in 2019 and 20, another 60 in 2020, 21. And so there'll be a cohort of 60 grantees for next school year that we'll award. Again, these grants are up to $500 to support those project and activity expenses. We're looking for programs that engage at least 50 youth throughout the year. So that doesn't necessarily have to be 50 youth in one project. That can be 50 youth that at different points throughout the year. Especially interested in programs that serve youth from low income and underserved communities. So especially in Title I school or similar communities. The grant is open to any after-school program, so it can be based in a school or a community organization or a youth development program, as long as you regularly work with students during that out-of-school time during the school year. And again, we also emphasize middle and high school aged youth. So you can certainly still apply if you work with younger students, elementary age. You're still very much eligible, but we look for a high percentage of our grantees to be middle and high school age programs, since we know there's usually such a drop off of participation in programs as students get older, that we're hoping that by adding service or service learning opportunities that can make those types of programs more appealing for older students. And so really looking for programs that serve that age group. We've mentioned the days of service a couple of times. We do encourage activities to take place throughout the school year, beginning with 9/11 Day in September at the beginning of the year, and MLK Day in the middle of the year around the time of semester change in January. And then as you start to wrap up the year with Global Youth Service Day at the end of April. None of those days are required for this grant. You can do whatever works best for your program, and the timing, for whenever you regularly meet with your students. You don't have to incorporate those days, but we do encourage that, since you can really make those connections to a larger national and global movement that your students can be a part of, which is really motivating, we find, for a lot of students, knowing that they're joining a much larger effort with students, other students across the country and around the world. You'll see there is a sign-up form here. We're actually going to provide you a direct link because if by attending this webinar, you actually get preference during our review process and selection process. So you'll want to use that link that will drop in the chat to get to the application. So even though you see the sign-up form on the website, for all of you, go ahead and use the direct link. And then before we do a quick walk through the application, I just want to point out that the application itself is also based around this IPARDC process that we've been talking about for the last hour. And we provide a lot of resources and clips, mostly what Scott mentioned at the beginning. But these are all broken out by segment to the relevant section of the application. And so you'll see when we walk through that they match up. And when you click on the links, it downloads just that section of the toolkit so that you can find the activities. And then just want to point out that all of the great resources from NYLC, all of those Engage handbooks for both the different levels and the different SDG areas are also all available here. So you can easily get to everything that we've mentioned today in one place. And then the bottom of this page has the map and the listing of the grantees from the last couple of years that Karen referenced. So you can actually open any of these and find the description from their application of what they did. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper and to see what other programs have done, that is available here. So a preview of the application, and again, we'll drop a link in, but it's ysa.org/AA webinar for Afterschool Alliance webinar. That will get you to directly to this application page, and note on the back end when your application is submitted that preference, so that we can see that you get that for attending this webinar. So we ask for the basic contact information and background about your program, including kind of what your regular activities and regular schedule are, so that we can see what structure exists for you to add service to. A couple of demographic pieces, specifically that age, so that we know that middle and high school percentage and that underserved low-income community percentage that we talked about in the requirements or preferences. There are a few background capacity questions, just to note, and you'll see this noted on all of them, that these are not scored. So don't worry if if maybe you're selecting that you haven't provided opportunities in the past, or that it's not very often, or your staff doesn't know a whole lot about service learning. That is okay. We're expecting people new to service learning for this grant. So we definitely don't expect you to be expert level while applying for the program. We hope you get there by the end and after receiving the grant and working with us for the year ahead. But this is these questions are just baseline data, so that we can do that comparison before and after the program. So don't worry about having to impress us with those answers. Give us the real information. And then the heart of the application is really a narrative question around each of those phases. So the investigation phase, the preparation, planning, and action, and reflection, demonstration, celebration. And again, that we refer you back to all of those resources on the landing page that are also linked here. We know that since you're applying now for next school year, you may not even know who your students are going to be. You obviously haven't worked with them yet, unless they're students returning from last year. So we don't expect a specific project idea in mind, because we know that you'll want to work with your students at the beginning of the year to choose what they're actually going to do. So the application really does focus on that process. Again, going back to Julie's, service learning is a process, not a project. And so what we're looking for in these answers is really, going into those resources, either YSAs or NYLCs, and they also are all labeled throughout with those same IPARD-C stages. So you can look for investigation or preparation or planning or reflection or demonstration on all of the different activities that are in those resources. And you can and we're looking for you to tell us, we think activity, 2 from the Semester of Service Toolkit, or the 3rd activity from, the Engaged Middle School Handbook makes the most sense for our program. And, we'll do that, on, 1 day a week in our program during the month of October, or, we'll do, reflection, activities, from those resources, every Friday, or whatever you think makes sense for how to actually add those steps of service learning into your regular activities. Just describe those for us so that we can see kind of what you're thinking in terms of how you can incorporate this into your programs. And then we do ask kind of the timing question, including if you're expecting any participation in those days of service. Again, not required, but we just want to get a sense of if you're going to plan to incorporate those. And that's it. Hopefully, it's not too long. Hopefully, you can do it in in a half hour or less. And again, this is open through the end of July, July 30th, and then we'll announce grantees in mid-August, so that you'll know as you start heading back to school, and can kick off in late August or September when you start working with your students again. And again, that link, ysa.org/AA webinar, will get you directly to the application with that preference. And with that, I think I will turn it back over to Alexis to start wrapping us up and to toss any questions our way that she's been monitoring.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this great and exciting information. There have been some questions that have been coming into the chat box. So, and if you have other questions, please add them in either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and address them. I guess one of the initial questions is, are these grants only open for programs that are taking place during the academic year, or can summer learning programs also participate in this, this grant process?
Yes, so this specific grant program from YSA is just for the school year timing. We certainly, support, and all of these resources we think are useful for summer programs as well. And we've done other programs in the past for summer programs, but yes, this grant program is for the 21-22 academic year.
Thanks, Mike. Additionally, it looks like we have some guests from abroad on our webinar this afternoon. Are these grants only open to programs that are in the United States, or can programs from across the world be able to participate?
Yeah, unfortunately, this funding is limited to the U.S. The Mott Foundation requires all of their the grant programs for the after-school work to be U.S. based.
Thank you. So a question for our panelists. service learning seems like there are endless possibilities, and that it's a really exciting opportunity for students to really be able to express their voice and get involved in working on projects that are close to their community. But I imagine that it can be overwhelming for programs where maybe they're transitioning from having done community service, or this is the first time they're considering doing a service learning project. Where's a good place for a program to start? Like, what kind of projects would you recommend recommend an after-school program, or students that might be interested in doing service learning start as they begin to learn the process?
I'll jump in. I think that's a really important question, because sometimes it can be overwhelming already with what you're already doing. I would look for where it makes sense. Where does it integrate with something that you're already doing? Maybe you're doing a food drive, which is good and important work. How can you move towards service learning? Add some of the IPARD process. Have them investigate. Have young people help plan the process. Have them do a survey to find out what's really needed in the community. So think about how using investigation and helping dig deeper into some of the reasons why we need to have a food drive. So those are some of my thoughts.
I just dropped in the link to our Idea Center, again, that Karen referenced. And one of the filters that I don't think she pointed out is you'll see 3 star icons for 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, easy, medium, difficult, I think is labeled. But those are actually based on kind of how in-depth and how long those activities take. So the 1 star activities, might take, a couple of days to a week worth of time. 2 stars might take about a month, and then the 3 star projects might take about a semester or even the entire year, and are a little bit, longer term activities. So if you think about, so if you're looking for kind of easy intro level kind of activities, go ahead and click on that 1 star icon, and that'll filter the ideas that way.
Great. So another question that pertains to the grant application process. Is there a specific date that these grants start?
Once they are awarded, you can start at any point once the school year starts, and then go through next May. So whatever timing during the 21-22 year for you works is totally fine.
So to apply for the grant, do you need to implement the practices described in your materials from YSA in current programs that are running, and what kind of reporting needs to be done for the grant if the organization receives the grant?
I will tackle the reporting question, and Karen, if you want to jump in on the other part. So for reporting, we ask for a couple of progress reports throughout the year. One around the time of MLK Day, so that which will ask for anything that happened that you did in the fall and plans for MLK Day. And then one in the kind of early spring that will share anything that you did for MLK Day. Again, not required, so you may not have anything to report, but activities that take place over the winter, and then your plans for the rest of the spring and Global Youth Service Day. Both of those are, just a few short questions around number of students that have participated and activity descriptions. And then the final impact report is a little bit longer, and that's where we ask for a little bit more details on the students who are involved, the demographic information, the description of what the activities were that you did throughout the year, total numbers participated, total number of hours served, people in the community helped by those activities. And then we also ask for an assessment of those 4 C's that Scott talked about, that we provide tools to help you observe your student leaders on throughout the year. We just ask for an assessment of that. And that's there's a scale for each question, and you just check kind of which level that you observed throughout the year. So I would say, those reports, as long as you look ahead of time to know what information you're collecting throughout the year, should take, a half hour or less at the end of the year.
Alexis, could you repeat the first part of that question? I want to make sure I'm answering right. It's due, go ahead.
Sure. So to apply for the grant, do you need to implement the practices discussed from YSA in current programs that may already be running a service learning project?
Got it. So the stories that we share really are designed to kind of provide ideas and strategies. So no one particular one needs to be followed. Like Mike said, the reason that we really focus the application more on the process rather than the work itself is we do value the importance of youth voice so much. And we know that you may not be working with those youth yet or have a chance to consult with them before you fill out the application. So we really wanted to make sure that there is room to, to consult the youth and to have them really drive the process, which is why we wanted to organize it around the process that adults really kind of coach the youth in. We have a rubric that we make available with the application so that applicants can really see how we are evaluating the applications. We wish we could fund them all, but we typically don't have enough funds to do that. So we do have it be competitive, and we try as much as we can to refer people in each section. Mike is bringing up the grant application again now. You can see that in each section, it includes links to resources where you can really think about what that step of the process might look like, so that it's as much of a kind of an action plan for you as it can be. And our aim is really to make our applications teaching tools so that by the time you've filled it out, you have really kind of a game plan going forward.
Great, thank you. Well, we've now hit 3 o'clock on the East Coast. So I'll ask the panelists, any final thoughts before we close out this afternoon? Okay, well then, thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. We hope that you learned a lot about service learning and you're thinking through ideas that you may take to apply for these grants. Thank you, Karen, Mike, Julie, and Scott for joining us this afternoon. Our contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. And again, thanks for joining this afternoon.